So today I'm going to be talking about eco-criticism's denial of anthropomorphism and the deconstruction of the liberal humanist self throughout the Wind-Up Girl, and applying this to artificial intelligence. Foucault's 1966 book, The Order of Things, he states, "It is comforting, however, and a source of profound relief to think that man is only a recent invention, a figure not yet 2 centuries old, a new wrinkle in our knowledge, and that he will disappear as soon as that knowledge has discovered a new form." According to Foucault, order exists in every culture, and such order is very deeply embedded in our systems of thought about what is considered natural. The order of things, currently, places humans as the most important beings in the physical world. But what happens when, as Foucault's quote implies, when man disappears and a new form of being takes its place? In this video, I will be using Paola Basiligupi's science fiction novel, The Wind-Up Girl, to explore the eco-criticism concept of anthropomorphism in genetically engineered humans, as the novel questions their exploitation in a counter-argument towards the liberal humanist ideas that have perpetuated in Western thought. Better understanding, I will go over some key terms used throughout this video. Eco-criticism is the analyzation of literature that draws on the destruction of nature and the relationship between humanity and nature. Sandeep Kumar Mishra, on page 169 of Eco-Criticism, a study of environmental issues in literature, encompasses the concept of eco-criticism when saying, "Eco-criticism is not merely the study of nature as represented in literature. Nature here does not mean a mere fancy of its beautiful aspects like plants and animals. Nature here means the whole of the physical environment consisting of the human and the non-human. The interconnection between the two creates the bond which is the basis of eco-criticism." Next, this novel explores the concept of anthropomorphism, which we'll view through the lens of eco-criticism. And anthropomorphism can be described as placing humans as the central figure in the universe by defining the world in human terms. This concept of anthropomorphism is strongly held in liberal humanism, which in this context is a literary and philosophical term where the view of the individual is central. This idea holds the belief that the self is a stable concept that is unchanging. Throughout the video essay, I will be using the theoretical approach of deconstruction, which is an approach that was created by Jacques Derrida, to break down the Wind-Up Girl by its assertion and the instability of meaning. Deconstruction focuses on how meaning disseminates and how systems and constructs in both our reality and literary texts cannot be unified enough to capture within a single explanation. In this analysis, I will be deconstructing the stable definition of the self, defined by liberal humanist ideology that is perpetuated by the concept of anthropomorphism throughout the Wind-Up Girl, as the text questions what is constituted as a human being in a world that is moving towards post-humanism. Essay, What is Posthumanism? She describes posthumanism as, posthumanism names a historical moment in which the decentering of the human by its imbrication in technical, medical, informatic, and economic networks is increasingly impossible to ignore. A historical introduction development that points towards the necessity of new theoretical paradigms and also thrusts them on us. A new mode of thought that comes after the cultural repression and fantasies, the philosophical protocols and evasions of humanism as a historically specific phenomenon. Sarah Kelly's essay, The Human Delusion, a discussion into the emergence of the post-human through the deconstruction of the liberal humanist view of the self. She defines the human as it has been regarded by traditional Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment humanism in the statements, typically male subject, center of his world, that being the world, defined by an extreme rational intelligence and unique consciousness. does not adhere to a higher divine being, but acts in accordance with his own thoughts. These thoughts, along with his actions, are what create history. Before deconstructing the ideas of liberal humanism, first I'll examine two works, Bill McKibben's Enough and René Descartes' Discourse on the Method, and these two works provide the framework for liberal humanist thinking. In Bill McKibben's 2003 book, Enough, he argues that we are at a point in time in which our advanced technologies could lead humanity into new, dangerous, and impoverished relationships with not only the planet, but ourselves as well. He argues that the rapid, aggressive progression of technology could have effects that alter our relationships with nature and ourselves. He states, first, human genetic engineering and then advanced forms of robotics and nanotechnology will call into question, often quite explicitly, our understanding of what it means to be a human being. McKibben begins the book with an example of himself running a marathon. He says, when it was done, I had a clearer sense of self, of my power and my fragility. For a period of hours, and especially those last gritty miles, I had been absolutely, utterly present, the moments desperately, magnificently clarified. As meaningless as it was to the world, that's how meaningful it was to me. McKibben believes that experiences like these are at stake because of the possibility of genetic engineering that would allow for the advancement of the anatomy that would, as he says, lessen these kind of experiences, and compares it to when athletes use steroids or other illegal drugs to gain an advantage over other participants. In Bill McKibben's thinking, which mirrors the same thinking that has perpetuated Western thought since the Enlightenment, the quote-unquote human being is treated as a definite, stable concept, as shown through his explanation of the marathon. He treats this marathon as something that only human beings are capable of being fully present in. In this liberal humanist point, the human is something fully understood, and the human experience is only valuable if deemed natural. In his hierarchy of thinking, the natural human being experience is automatically better than that of the genetically modified humans, subhuman, or posthuman, who is automatically considered the other. In my second example, René Descartes explains his methods of reasonings through both his own life experience as well as philosophical arguments in his book, Discourse on the Method. In my research, I primarily focused on the observation that Descartes makes in Part 5, in which he examines the anatomy of humans and explains his reasoning for the difference between man and animal. Early in the work, Descartes states, I personally know of no other mental attributes that go to make up an accomplished mind, for as regards reason or good sense, insofar as it is the only thing that makes us human and distinguishes us from brute beasts. In this statement, Descartes makes clear that the human is seen as the only being that has both sense and reason, and therefore is automatically superior to all other beings. Later, when reviewing the anatomy of a human, Descartes says, at this point, I had dwelt on this issue to know that if it were such machines having the organs and outward shape of a monkey or any other irrational animal, we would have no means of knowing that they were not of exactly the same nature as these animals, whereas, if any such machines resembled us in body and imitated our actions, insofar as this was practically possible, we should still have two very certain means of recognizing that they were not, for all that, real human beings. Sarah Kelly cites this quote in her essay and says, Descartes essentially stated that human beings would forever be able to distinguish the distinction between the human and the non-human. It was considered unheard of that non-human or posthumans could exist as autonomous ontological entity with more authority than the human. Descartes argued that alongside dialogues, action based on understanding would serve to affirm this distinction. Even though machines might do things as well as we do them, or perhaps even better, they would inevitably fail in others, which would reveal that they were acting not through understanding, but only from the disposition of their organs. Hence, it is for all practical purposes impossible for a machine to have enough different organs to make it act in all the contingencies of life in the way in which our reason makes us act. However, Discourse on the Method was written in 1637. It's easy to see why Descartes couldn't imagine a future with posthumans and transgenic beings that can be created exactly in the human being's image, or the capabilities of artificial intelligence technology that can mimic human voices, artwork, and likeness that is indistinguishable to the original. As stated in the essay, Ecology and Dystopia and Fictionalization, writing can be seen as a way of reaction to inform people on the pollution, ongoing anthropocentric plans, and the dramatic consequences of it, which are annihilating all ecosystems. In that sense, fiction is one of the best genres to reach people because it touches the feelings through possible scenarios. In Paolo Bacigalupi's 2009 novel, The Wind-Up Girl, is a science fiction novel that does just that. In The Wind-Up Girl, the world has been devastated by agricultural catastrophe, with disease strains such as blister rust that run rampant. These diseases mutate too rapidly for humans to stop the devastation that leads to the destruction of crops and the humans who ingest the contaminated crops. This agricultural issue leads to agri-corporations such as Pure Cow, Utex, and Agrigen that create genetically modified plants that now garner higher profits and are claimed as the intellectual property of their respective companies, though they are still susceptible to disease. Thailand, in which the novel takes place, is one of the last nation-states that remains and has its own seed bank. Genetically modified humans that are immune to disease strains are produced because of the decimation of the population and are exploited as a resource for human beings. The novel follows one wind-up, in particular, Emiko, who is subjected to sexual exploitation as she has been programmed to be submissive. As Sarah Kelly points out in her essay, throughout the 19th and 20th century, there have been instances in science fiction literature where genetic construction and alteration, both on humans and animals, highlights the strain between humans, non-humans, and the post-human. This strain becomes evident through the concept of anthropomorphism in The Wind-Up Girl through the treatment of genetically engineered humans, called new people, who physically resemble the human being but are denied identity and regulated as subhuman. In Andrew Hagman's essay, The Challenge of Imagining Ecological Futures, Paola Bacigalupi's The Wind-Up Girl, he points out how one of the main characters, Emiko, brings to light the contradictions of the humanist prejudice that are present in anti-posthuman discourse, as she is discriminated against by nearly every character in the novel for being non-human due to her being a new person. This prejudice against Emiko and her kind, especially from a religious standpoint, is reflected in a quote on page 35 of The Wind-Up Girl that states, "Not human, certainly, but also not the threat that the people of this basic savage culture made her out to be. Certainly not the devils that the Gramites warn against at their pulpits, or the soulless creatures imagined out of hell that the forest monk Buddhists claim. Not a creature unable to ever achieve a soul or a place in the cycles of rebirth and striving for nirvana. Not the affront to the Quran that the green headbands believe." In Sarah Kelly's essay, The Human Delusion, a discussion into the emergence of the posthuman through the deconstruction of the liberal humanist view of the self, she states, "It is now only through the emergence of posthuman identities that this representation of the human is becoming endangered and will ultimately disappear. It is this fear of the loss of the human being that drives the othering of the new people in the text. The exploration of the disintegration and regeneration of posthuman ideology is perpetrated through the two primary figures of Emiko and Dr. Gibbons, who is a renegade scientist that is responsible for making the new people. Andrew Hagman comments in his essay that Bacigalupi weaves these strands together in a savvy approach to thinking ecology that avoids repeating conventional boundaries used to separate the purportedly human from the non-human. On page 247 of The Wind-Up Girl, Dr. Gibbons says, "This is the nature of our beasts and our plagues. They are not dumb machines to be driven about. They have their own needs and hungers, their own evolutionary demands. They must mutate and adapt, and so you will never be done with me. And when I am gone, what will you do then? We have released demons upon the world, and your walls are only as good as my intellect. Nature has become something new." Dr. Gibbons' suggestion of nature becoming something new forces readers to rethink the rigid notion of the human being and to sympathize with Emiko. By relinquishing this humanist notion of the human being, there is motivation to cultivate hospitality towards Emiko as her status of being new, as in Andrew Hagman's words, only from a position interesting in preserving the conventional liberal humanist subject. The Wind-Up Girl displays how the concept of anthropomorphism leads to the subjugation of those deemed non-human through the new people that are exploited as a source of entertainment and labor for humans that conceive them as existing solely for human benefit. The prime example of this exploitation is through Emiko, as she has been especially programmed to be submissive and is used essentially as a sex slave throughout the novel. She must constantly live in fear as her life is in danger once her former owner abandons her in Bangkok. She is not only an illegal alien in the country, but an illegal non-human who faces the threat of being recycled if she is discovered. Though she did not face an endangerment of her life in Japan with her former owner, in both locations she is treated as a machine that is easily disposed of once she has served her purpose of being sexual entertainment for the masses that she is programmed to please. In the essay The Ecological Thought by Tim Morton, Morton states, "What's wrong about genetic engineering is that it turns life forms into private property to enrich huge corporations." Applying this thought to Emiko, what is wrong is not her existence in itself, but rather her existence as a life form that becomes the private property of another. We can take this a step further by stating that it is wrong that she is seen as property in the first place when she has desires and feelings just as any other sentient being. This subjugation and objectification of Emiko comes as a direct result of the influence of anthropomorphic thinking, as the narrator remarks on page 106 of The Wind-Up Girl. With stamps and a passport, she was not a transgression against niche nature, but an exquisite valued object. In Hagman's essay, he points out that this is a posthuman contradiction of the traditional idea of nature, as this passage brings together the lapsed notions of nature and the human being. Derrida's idea of hospitality can be used to help deconstruct this idea of the other that allows for the subjugation of Emiko. In his work, The Animal That Therefore I Am, and through his ideas of unconditional hospitality, Derrida proposes philosophical approaches that can be applied to the Wind-Up Girl to deconstruct the liberal humanist ideology through the representation of the other that is found in Emiko. The Animal That Therefore I Am develops ideas that can be drawn about the undesirability of humanism. In the essay Derrida and Humanism, Some Implications for Post-Humanist Political and Educational Practice, Paul Allender states, while Derrida himself may not have developed ideas about what posthumanism might become, he began to lay a terrain for its development, and The Animal That Therefore I Am plays a key role in this endeavor. In Paul Allender's essay, he examines how Derrida points out the extent of the subjection of the animal. In a quote on page 25 of The Animal That Therefore I Am, in which Derrida states, "By the joint developments of zoological, ethological, biological, and genetic forms of knowledge, which remain inseparable from techniques of intervention into their object, from the transformation of the actual object, and from the milieu and world of their object, namely the living animal. He states that Derrida is referring to of genetic experimentation, the industrialization of animal meat production, massive artificial insemination, and the tremendous manipulation of the genome, all in alleged interest of human beings. While being applied to animals in this context, this idea can easily be applied to genetically modified beings in the Wind-Up Girl that are exploited just as animals have been. In Derrida's work, The Animal That Therefore I Am, Derrida concludes the work by asking the question, can man let being be? In this question, Derrida confirms the validity of those who are deemed non-human, subhuman, or posthuman. As Allender states on page 325 of his essay, Derrida promotes the idea of non-humans as of equal worth to humans by questioning the ways in which humans have been ontologically separated as superior to the animal world. Derrida, as a foreigner himself in many ways, focuses heavily on the ethics of hospitality throughout many of his works. In Mark Westmoreland's essay, Interruptions, Derrida and Hospitality, he focuses on Derrida's deconstruction of hospitality that emphasizes the distinction made between the self and the other. Westmoreland states, operative between the self and the other, hospitality governs all human interaction, and perhaps interactions with animals as well. It is Derrida's proposition of unconditional hospitality toward the other that rejects the liberal humanist notions that beings must differentiate each other if one does not fit in the stable definition of the human being. A pivotal point is made in the first page of Westmoreland's article in which he states, from a phenomenological standpoint, one could claim that one's identity is only understood in relation to others. Citizens understand themselves in relation to others, to foreigners, saying, we are not those sorts of people, we are citizens. This point can be applied to Amico and other wind-ups, as they are demonized in the novel because they are only understood in relation to the humanist idea of the self in which they are the other. This thinking is what Derrida invokes when he asks the question, is not hospitality an interruption of the self? This idea of unconditional hospitality is a deconstructive concept, as deconstruction entails the breaking apart of the systems, ideas, and stable definitions. In doing this, Derrida's deconstructive approach provides a way for the non-human to coexist with the human being, once the idea of the liberal humanist self has faded. In this act, Derrida's claim that hospitality is the deconstruction of the at-home, deconstruction is hospitality to the other, comes true. Analysis of the wind-up girl through the deconstruction of the liberal humanist self by the rejection of anthropomorphism is an idea that can be applied to our contemporary society through the emergence of artificial intelligence technology. The treatment of AI and its ethics shows how these concepts are applied and further shows the problematic ways the non-human is measured in terms of the humanistic. In the report, Principled Artificial Intelligence, Mapping Consensus and Ethical and Rights-Based Approaches to Principles for AI, artificial intelligence is described as systems that are software, and possibly also hardware systems, designed by humans that, given a complex goal, act in the physical or digital dimension by perceiving their environment through data acquisition, interpreting the collected structured or unstructured data, reasoning on the knowledge, or processing the information derived from the data and deciding the best actions to take to achieve the given goal. In some of the documents analyzed, they define AI as systems that take action with autonomy to achieve a predefined goal, and some add that these actions are generally tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. In this definition, the use of the word autonomy hints at AI's capacity to be thought of as more than an instrument exploited for human benefit. Much like the new person Amico in The Wind-Up Girl, Artificial intelligence technology is deemed non-human and only given autonomy to be developed by humans to have command over the non-human entity, where focus remains on prioritizing humans under the conception that humans are at the center of agency and cognition. As stated in the article Rethinking Human-Centric AI, an introduction to posthumanist critique by Nadita Mellenby. Mellenby states leading academic institutions such as Stanford University's Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence propose to align AI development with the notion of beneficial intelligence based on humanistic and human-centric values. Generally, human centricism posits that humans should have command over non-human entities. The Principled Artificial Intelligence Project has gathered the prolific principles documents aimed at providing normative guidance regarding AI-based systems. The report states from prominent Silicon Valley magnates concerns about the singularity to popular science fiction dystopias, our society, governments, and companies alike are grappling with the potential shift in the locus of control from humans to AI systems. Thus, it is not surprising that human control of technology is a strong theme among the documents in our dataset, with significant representations for the three principles that fall under it: human review of automated decision, ability to opt out of automated decision, and human control of technology or the other general. The Wind-Up Girl and Artificial Intelligence Technology, analyzed through the deconstruction of liberal humanism, argues for the challenging of strong anthropocentric worldviews that reinforce the principle of human mastery over non-humans. The rapid advancement made in artificial intelligence technology have made the question of the development of the post-human become not one of will, but a question of when. Mellenby states in her article, the framing of ethical AI that is anchored in humanistic narratives ignores that the notion of nature is a complex and contested battlefield of meanings, hierarchies, and exclusions, where racial, sexual, ethnic, and other differences have been cast in terms that distinguish so-called higher forms of humanity from lesser ones, deemed to lack some degree of rationality or cultivation. The reinforcement of humanistic narratives seeks only to continue systems that have, in Mellenby's words, sanctioned social, political, and economic hierarchy, exclusions, and subjugation to date. She argues that through the act of decentering anthropocentrism thinking, relationality, solidarity, and care as primary aspects of human and non-human association rather than atomism, hierarchy, and mastery. Deconstruction of this ideology can subvert the domination and transcend that defines prevalent conceptions of human and non-human relations. Paola Bagilasuppi's novel, The Wind-Up Girl, is a post-humanist text that uses eco-criticism to highlight the problems created in anthropomorphic thinking that leads to the destruction of nature in the novel and the suppression of genetically engineered human beings as a result of liberal humanist views. As Carrie Wolf states in her essay, What is Posthumanism?, it is worth amplifying for a moment the disciplinary, institutional, ethical, and political states of this mutational, viral, or parasitic form of thinking. As Dave Willis notes, it is deconstruction's constitutive dehiance, its originary rupture, self-division, that defines it as a disturbance, displacement, or disruption of the status quo. Such a mode of thought has enormous potential for resisting the self-assurance of any hegemonic discourse or practice, because it infects and mutates through the very structures, privileged terms, and discursive nodes of power on which is parasitical. The Wind-Up Girl encourages the reader to deconstruct this parasitic thinking that drives Western thought and to restructure their thinking through deconstruction of liberal humanism that reject the notions that drive our world to place priority solely on the individual. This thinking is applicable to the emergence of artificial intelligence as it is framed only in terms of humanist narratives of ethical. These terms only drive the anthropomorphic liberal humanist idea of the self that must be dismantled to create a world that is no longer conceptualized in the hierarchy created by humanist discourse that prioritizes the human being above all others. The Wind-Up Girl and its correlation to the contemporary issue of artificial intelligence technology asks the reader to not merely question the state of the human being, but question the absolute concentration of the apparent interests of man alone, as stated by Paul Allender. In deconstructing this ideology, the emphasis is placed on focusing the ways in which we can improve the world around us that are not human-centric, that will improve conditions for the physical world, non-humans, and the animals that we differentiate so vastly from ourselves. In the exploration of the difference between the self and the other, one finds that there is not much difference at all. Rather, it's the liberal humanist ideas that we have clung to that have dictated so. In deconstructing this mindset, Paul Allender comments that it opens the possibility of contributing towards such a philosophy that opens up new realms in language, thought, and relations.